afternoon, honestly, that I am most excited about. Our keynote speaker is my dad. So Will Weber, Dr. Will Weber, is one of the founders of Journeys, along with my mom, Joan, who's sitting toward the back. And Will actually came to Journeys through a very interesting path. Will grew up in Racine, Wisconsin, and was a Peace Corps volunteer in Nepal, both in a small village in northeastern Nepal and then in Kathmandu, where he got a lot of experience with the variety of cultures and communities in Nepal, and also conservation work there. After serving in the Peace Corps, Joan and Will both came back to the University of Michigan, where they were graduate students. And while they were here, they had friends who were so interested in the idea of travel in a place like Nepal that they thought, well, why don't we just plan one trip? And it worked. In fact, they found a lifelong partner and friend there who helped them make a business in Nepal. And then bit by bit, country by country, they added other destinations, making sure that they would only start planning trips in places that they could really get to know, where they could know people and have relationships. And the business has been around 35 years. So by now, Will has traveled to dozens of destinations, and the company has built to offering trips in over 60 destinations. Will is both a very seasoned traveler and also an avid bird watcher. He's the chair of the Hawk Migration Association of North America. And, well, I don't need to say too much more, although I could go on for a long time. I have lots of stories about him that you can ask me about later. But I'm just going to turn it over to Will to talk about Evermore imaginative engagement with the planet.
Thank you, Robin. That was a very flattering introduction. I hope I can meet your expectations, and I thank all of you for coming. I really need to begin by acknowledging what many of you know, but some of you don't. This is really, for travelers, hallowed ground, the Michigan Union. Some of you know why. Did you see the plaque outside the entrance to the Michigan Union? On October 14th, 1960, at 2 a.m. in the morning, John F. Kennedy, they arrived fashionably late for their campaign performances way back then too. John F. Kennedy declared there would be a Peace Corps. The idea was delivered. And so, this is the birthplace of the Peace Corps, which in some ways is the greatest travel opportunity experience, I think, ever created in the country. And it was the model for many other national corps. So if some of the ideas for Journeys came out of the Peace Corps, and there's something special about this place for travelers. And we invited some people from the Peace Corps office here to come, and I hope there may be some prospective volunteers in the audience. We definitely are believers in the Peace Corps, and I know we have ex-volunteers as well in the audience. So that's kind of part of the agenda, is if you really want to get involved, if you really want to have an impact, if you really want to change your own life in an imaginative way, that's one alternative. So, and this, I understand, University of Michigan is the leading source of new Peace Corps volunteers even today. Okay, all right, more in here. We have to bend down too. All right, let's see how this works. All right, let me see, hang on. So, all right, I admit to being a little bit nervous here. One reason is I've learned so much from you, and I've much more to learn, especially from the guides here, but also travelers. Robin suggested I've traveled a great deal, but there are people in this room who've traveled as much or more. And I think many of you will relate. I'm trying to find the sort of common ground here to address everybody. And one of the common themes I know when I'm on the telephone talking to someone who's considering a Journeys trip, one of the first things that comes out is a confession, which is, my friends all think I'm crazy for wanting to go on this trip. And if you haven't heard it, it's been said of you when you've said you want to go to Madagascar or climb Kilimanjaro. So I think what I'd like to do is, imagine I'm addressing a room full of crazies. And I know I'm preaching to a choir of crazies. So we'll see what notes we can hit together about this passion we have for extraordinary kinds of travel. Oops, hang on. So, let's explore our madness. One of the reasons, and I should back up and briefly say, it's important to understand how your friends do view you. Not just because they should better understand why you're doing what you're doing, but you know very well, they're missing out. Now, Las Vegas, I'm sure, has its appeal, and Caribbean cruises with endless, you're laughing, we shouldn't demean what other people like to do when they travel, and I don't mean to do that. I'm not being facetious. Certain kinds of people just aren't right for the kinds of travel that you enjoy, and for those of you who may not have traveled yet, that I hope you will enjoy. But one of the main reasons we have trouble convincing people of our sanity is the media are sending a very different message than go see the world. They're telling us nightly, it's dangerous out there. Now, I'm a former journalist, so I feel I can say a little bit about what's happening. Before I joined the Peace Corps, I worked for 2 newspapers. And, the phrase that's often said is, if it bleeds, it leads. And there are various variations of this term. News is about things that are dramatic. And the things that are going on that we're seeing, they may be dramatic if you look closely, but the media doesn't usually look closely. That's one of the problems. The other is these events tend to last much longer than they are, in fact, in extent in the country. I was speaking with Ehab, who's one of our panelists, and even us, experienced travelers, said, what about Egypt? Ehab is really honest. He regularly goes to places, until recently Syria, I guess. How recently Syria, Ehab?
Well, it was until about maybe a year and a half ago.
Okay, Ehab knows the Arab world, and he knows Egypt, and he says now, in Egypt, he's Egyptian, you could go. But probably some of you, even in this room, who've traveled extensively, might have some doubts about that. But that bad news lingers long beyond it's a real threat. We still have people who, when I suggest they should go to Uganda and see the guerrillas, they kind of have this sense that maybe Idi Amin's troops are still, running around Entebbe, avoiding the Israelis. And we're so used to it that we just have to say, no, it's really okay. Nepal is another example. Nepal had a Maoist rebellion. What could be more frightening than that? And in fact, now the Maoists are in charge, effectively. But you can go to Nepal and have very much the experience that I had in the Peace Corps. We did that. Robin and I recently went back to Nepal and did a trek through the Arun Valley of East Nepal. Some of you may know it. I know some of you have trekked there. And a very pleasant experience. Things had changed. Things change. But very seldom are you, as a foreign visitor, going to be a target of any kind of residue of those kinds of revolutionary activities. As I said, there's this lingering effect of bad news that your friends all know about, but you have to talk to people who've been there recently to know, what's really going on. Sometimes the bad news is good news. And we've had people who've gone to Egypt right after the Arab Spring, and it was dramatic. Planes and flights stopped, but when they went, the experience was extraordinary. And in many cases, thank you. In many cases, the reception you receive in a place that's experienced recent difficulties is overwhelmingly positive. People miss tourists. Thousands of people in popular destinations really dependent on you making a visit. And when tourism stops, it's a real economic crisis for people. And so in some ways, it's your opportunity. And we'd suggest that you look closely at whether it's really safe to travel or not. And maybe it's not. Very possibly it is. And so that's another way to think about avoiding those long lines at the tourist monuments or the museums. So I guess what I'm saying is, there's a method here about travel that really looks carefully at what the real picture is and makes a judgment not based on headlines or news of the past, but rather a more objective evaluation. Well, there's some things that are really, really helping us. Media, CNN, Fox News, they're not helping that much, except in the sense that they're scaring other people away, not you. But one of the things that one of the large phenomena is that travel is easier than it's ever been. It's easier, first of all, in terms of getting to destinations. Now, if you think about it, those of you who've been traveling for the last 40, 30, 20 years, more flights than ever, more airports than ever, more service than ever. Some people even allege flights are more often on time than ever. Maybe so, maybe not, but that's not the deciding factor. There's more accessible destinations. You're actually permitted to go to more places than ever before. When we speak of receptive services, people are waiting for you with good food, safe food, nicer hotels, better roads, better cars. So for any given place that you might go, I mean, you don't have to think of, if you're not toughing it, you're not having a good time, or you're not fulfilling what a traveler should do. Just about any place that we go to now that we were going to 30 years ago, there's a more efficient access to the things that you want to see. In many cases, those are things that you couldn't have even ever seen before. Forests that are more remote that now have hiking trails and that are actually protected. Villages that before may have been off limits because the government said you can't go there. I'm thinking, for example, Burma, Myanmar. There's so many places that you can go that just 2 or 3 years ago were totally inaccessible to you. Immigration to distant destinations is easier than ever. I can remember the first trip to Madagascar. There's this long line for those few travelers coming into Tananarive Airport, and you have to fill out in triplicate with pens that were not available, forms for immigration that were only in French. And there's nobody there to help you. They're impatient, that you don't speak French, but it took a while. And that was the case with many places. Immigration was really designed to sort of slow you down and gather details that they didn't really need, but that's just the way they did it. My last trip to Delhi was not one of the better places, but I don't know if anybody's been through the Delhi airport recently. I hope your experience was like mine, which was the immigration people are waving me over. Would you please hurry up and come through the line so you can come into India? It was really quite an extraordinary change. I had the same experience in other destinations recently. So there's a lot of work going on to make it easier for you to go. Not necessarily cheaper. The cost of visas, as you know, is going up. And but you can get there if you want to, and you'll get permission, with one exception. We are an exceptional nation here. We make it really tough for people to come to the USA. And I'm not talking about coming to the USA, but I feel in the sense to our guides who didn't make it here that you should know what it takes to come to the US if you don't have a history of travel, if you don't have a lot of money in the bank, if your family's not connected, if you don't know somebody in the embassy. I'm really sad. This is a wonderful weekend, but the sadness I feel is that our guide from China, with whom we've worked for many, many years, 2 of our longest partners, Buddhist Ladakh is way up in northern India, were not able to get visas. They paid their $150. Our guide from Bhutan went to Calcutta in the hot season. He's from the mountains. Waited 3 days for his $150 US visa interview and was rejected out of hand. I mean, they didn't even want to see his papers. The documents he filled out suggested he didn't make the cut for coming to the US. And, I say it to you because you should know what it's up against. And I was speaking with people here who've had that experience of trying to bring someone. The Rotary Club, a much more influential organization than us, has the same problem when they want to bring people. And, is this really what our immigration policy has come to, change the subject. Another positive thing that we can all look forward to, and I think we've all enjoyed, is an improvement in the technology of travel. When I first joined the Peace Corps, there was this sort of holy grail of going to your village, which was just carry what you need in an over-the-shoulder bag. For 2 years in a remote village. And I don't know if anybody ever tried that, but when we started Journeys, we suggested that, you should pack down to a small kit, and if possible, put everything in your carry-on luggage. 35 years ago, that was a real trick. But now, I'll bet many of you on your last trip with us, or if you were to take a trip, could easily fit in a carry-gun. We have new incentives. The cost of checked luggage, of course, is there when it wasn't in the past. But when we started, we almost issued people a 36-inch long, heavyweight, 18-inch wide duffel. And some people asked us, could we maybe use 2 of these for our stuff? And now we see everybody's luggage is smaller. Well, what is it that makes for smaller, improved luggage? Fleece clothing. You layer it, and you don't need so much, and it's not that heavy. Quick dry fabrics. There's so many. Every year there's 3 with new fantastic names you hadn't heard before, but it's lighter, tougher, stronger, and breathes better. Compact binoculars. It used to be you have to these big, heavy prism binoculars. Now they're easily you can take a smaller one. Miracle medicines, it used to be you'd pack a big kit because you didn't. Now it's simplified. There's broad spectrum antibiotics. You need less to take care of it. And of course, there's more available in your destination. Smartphones, what a miracle thing for travelers. It's map, it's language guides, it's bird guides, it's your email communication. There was a period when people were taking those big, heavy, thick, portable computers because they needed to stay connected. And, iPads, smart, and so, any iPhone 5S's here in the room, a gold, nobody can flash a gold iPhone. You got a 5S already? Good for you. All right, so ready to take a trip. Need even less carry-on now. Digital cameras. How many of you remember the film camera days and the lead-lined bags, and you needed to take 100 rolls of film, right, to be sure you had enough, and now one chip carries all those pictures for you. Versatility of credit cards. I know what a pain traveler's checks were, and there are probably people in this room who remember traveler's checks. That credit card will be pretty useful pretty much anywhere you go, and your cash is probably safer too to use and more widely accepted. That's one thing that hasn't changed so much. American dollars you can really change easily anywhere. Flashlights. Anybody notice that you don't replace batteries anymore during a trip? What is a D cell and a C cell anymore? It's a very compact thing. You're taking much less in the way of batteries. You really can get by with 1 or maybe 2 pairs of shoes because they're lighter, more versatile, they fit better. When we started, we were advising people to buy those boots a couple months in advance and take some hikes because boots didn't come ready to fit. And I don't know what's gone on, or maybe some people still get blisters, but I notice fewer people getting blisters in their footwear because there's been advances in technology often that you don't see. E-tickets are another item that, again, simplifies travel. You don't lose tickets anymore. Some of us still have a panic attack when we're going up to the airport and looking for the ticket because we forgot we don't have one. And you just remember your name and your passport, and you're going to be fine. And finally, an amazing device, the wheeled luggage. Now, can people remember when there was no wheeled luggage? And is anybody who doesn't travel with wheeled luggage now? It's been a significant thing. And we've always had this notion that, if you want to take a trip, one way you demonstrate your fitness is you can manage your own luggage. And I think that was a threshold for some people who got the Journey's standard issue big duffel bag like this. That was really unmanageable. So all these things add up to being, it's easier to pack it up and get on a plane. And I think it's made a significant difference for people. But I want to note one thing. There's a certain circularity to life. Things come back. Yesterday, when we had our little guide shopping trip over at Bivouac, we're looking through all this latest gear. They've got it all down there, if you're not familiar. And a couple people were paying for the purchase, and I was standing just kind of admiring the stuff myself, and the salesman comes up to me and says, "Hey, have you heard about the latest in clothing?" "Well, I'm interested. Tell me about it." And he says, "It's wool." I says, "What?" And I'm standing next to a kiosk that has, remember the pea coat, the navy pea coat? They're coming back, folks. Here's a picture of a merino sheep. I don't know, maybe it's Australian or Kiwi or US. And there's this wool clothing. It looks like high-tech stuff. There were T-shirts, wool T-shirts. I said, well, wait a minute. All right, give me the pitch. Give me the elevator pitch on wool clothing. So, yeah, I've worn this shirt for 3 days. It doesn't smell. I can just keep wearing it. So if you wear a synthetic, you can't do that. And I said, does it wash quickly? Yeah, it washes really well. And, if you get a spark on it, you're not going to burn a kind of plastic-looking hole in it. I said, wow, I guess things come around, and so I suppose it's not as expensive as miracle stuff. Well, you need to be prepared to spend $60 or $70 for a T-shirt, but it's really great. So I think things sort of cycle upwards in terms of cost, and even though they run out of innovation and what's underneath that cost. But I found that really interesting. I wasn't a buyer. I think, looking another way, we've talked about the media and the influence and the nature of risk. And I think our friends who have this uncertainty about the wisdom of our travel decisions really look at this risk, and if there's risk at all that's definable by any source, regardless of credibility, it's like, all right, why bother? There's no risk in a Gulf vacation in Arizona or, going to a casino. I mean, there's risk of a different sort, but people are, I think, more willing to take a financial risk that involves a certain, measure of fun in the process, whereas it seems like our kind of trip, those risks are not the fun type. But in fact, it's really a matter of deciding what are these risks that you're willing to take. And I would say that most of you who take the kinds of trips that we offer are actually looking for that risk. We've had experiences, and if you've traveled with us, there's this waiver and assumption of risk that we ask you to sign. And if you've looked at it closely, you are taking a lot of risks that we don't deliver, that almost never happen. But it's your risk, and we'll do everything we can really not to let those things happen, I assure you. But we've actually had people who've come back and said, I read all about your trip. I read everything you gave me. I read this statement of risk for this hike I was going to take, and I was really ready for a lot more. I thought the roads might be rougher. I thought the hike might be more difficult. I thought I might see more people in trouble along the way. Don't shoot too high. But think about the certain risks that you really don't want to take. You don't want to get sick. You'd rather not miss your flight and have to pay for a new ticket. But there are certain ways in which you should think about risk. One way I like to think about it, it reminds me of Joan's story last night, is kind of getting lost just enough. I hope some of you have the habit when you go to a strange city, getting up early and maybe taking a hotel card with you, but just go out and wander and think about going where other people haven't gone. Really, that's one of the things that I think we have in common. We'd rather not see a lot of other people. And one way to do that is take a little more risk with how far off the beaten path that you're willing to go. I guess the way I say it is, don't throw caution to the wind, but hang it out there and check the breeze a little bit. The other thing I guess I'd say, I look out at the audience, and for some reason the term old-timers rings in my head, maybe from last night. But, as we get older, there are risks that are perhaps easier to take than when we're younger. I know one of the problems that we hear often is young people tend to evaluate risks differently and perhaps more conservatively. Going back to this madness notion, it's surprising how often in our office grandparents want to take the grandkids on a trip to the Galapagos, and the parents in between just can't imagine that that's a good idea. Or the kids can't believe Grandma and Grandpa want to go off to this dangerous place. Or, the kids want to go off, and neither the grandparents nor the parents think it's safe to go trekking in some place where it probably is safe to go. So there's this sort of intergenerational conflict that gets generated. But there's a very significant risk of not traveling now. One, because none of us are actually getting any younger, and opportunities are disappearing. We hear often people who, there's a sadness in their voice, and they say, I can't do that anymore. Kilimanjaro becomes a certain monument to growing older that you have to act upon to climb when you're at a certain age. So for many people, a surprising number, and I'm not sure why it's just Kilimanjaro, but it's a 50th birthday celebration or a 60th or a 70th goal. And I think, understanding that it's a risk, understanding as you grow older it becomes more difficult, it also is an incentive not to grow old in your body as much as you are in your chronology. Preparing for difficult and sometimes risky trips, I think keeps you more alive, keeps you more awake, keeps you more fit. I know for myself, I'm finding I've got a big hiking trip coming up to Sumatra next summer. And I really need to be thinking about the exercise machine and a little running, and a little exercise. And if I weren't planning that trip, I'd probably take things more casually. So I don't think there's anybody here who can imagine it wouldn't be a good idea to stay fit. And thinking of that trip that is more of a risk if you're not fit is probably a good way to do that. The other dimension of that, it's not just you, but the places are changing. We often will hear from older travelers or travelers who've been traveling a long time, oh, you should have been there 20 years ago. And, I sort of think, all right, Kathmandu, you guys should have been there in 1970. Man, was it a place. But, it's still a place now. It's still pretty neat. The other destination, now I'll bet some of you have heard this one, oh, you should have been to Bali, when Gauguin was painting those paintings, I guess. But, Bali's still an amazing place. One of the things that happens to places with amazing cultural pageantry is the people are making some money out of tourists, and they're still into their pageants. Another example is Papua New Guinea. How many have been to Papua New Guinea here? Pretty amazing place, right? These people, they're still living lives that are wild. We won't tell you my Papua New Guinea stories in total, but Dick knows what a hard time I had on my last trip. But it's amazing what people are doing with their traditions and bright paints and the investment in extraordinary bird of paradise costumes. It's more pageant, it's more spectacular visually and photographically and scenically. And I think the people are stimulated by their ability to get ever more elaborate with their ritual. And it's not less spectacular. If you look at old pictures of some of these places, it was wonderful. It has that National Geographic 1924 patina to the picture, and you look at them and you compare it to your own picture. Well, all right, it is digital and in color. That makes a difference for sure. But these places still have a real dramatic resonance that hasn't changed in a negative way. Now, we could look closely at it and say, well, the people or culture's changing, whatever. They drive cars to these pageants and change their clothes. But, still, there's an attempt often to keep these cultural rituals alive. And they're worth seeing. Don't imagine necessarily that you're going to go and, be the person who arrives and it's really not the same as it was before. But, I'd like to just take a little broader perspective about why we travel and what travel does for us. We have better technology. We have a rationale that's clear. But one of the things that impresses me, and I think about many of the people in this room, is that travel really gives us a broader perspective. I'm going to just list some topics here on the screen. Climate change, endangered species, desertification, religious conflict, quality of people, pollution of environment, global poverty and hunger, prospects for world peace. All right, I went pretty fast through a series of major issues. That's sobering when you think about them. And as I imagine this room, your travel has shaped your view of these things. And there's nothing so poignant as to encounter a farmer in some remote place who knows nothing about the issues of the world, but he tells you he's struggling because the rains don't come anymore the way they used to, the way they came for his father and his grandfather. Or, the farmer who just can't produce anymore because the desert's creeping in, or the water table has gone down. And we can read about these things, and you'll read both sides. You'll hear from Fox that this is somebody's imagination. It's a hoax. You'll see from CNN that people are dying on the spot. There's certain truth to this for various situations. But you as a traveler see for yourself that firsthand encounter. I think of my guides. Wherever I go, this climate change thing is really bothering me a lot because I don't see any evidence that things are getting better. I don't see any evidence that people say, yeah, it's always this way. The weather's like this. It's not anywhere. And the more you travel, the more you sense these problems really are global problems. They're not isolated. They're not somebody making something up and blowing it up as if, it's bigger than it is. So I think we as travelers have both an embedded responsibility from our knowledge, but the other side of it is, I think it gives us a certain humility in terms of what we really know for ourselves, and hopefully a charitable view, both toward what's necessary to solve the problem, as well as for those people who are genuinely suffering through no fault of their own and not facing great prospects. I want to talk a little bit about how our own experience can expand and be more positive and more creative. I went to school back in the 60s and 70s, and Abraham Maslow was a popular psychologist then. And everybody know about Maslow's hierarchy? All right, very knowledgeable audience. That's wonderful. But let me just briefly summarize. Maslow was an American psychologist in the 50s, I believe. And rather than focus on just thinking about people's problems, he looked at the higher level of human performance and created what's sometimes called Maslow's hierarchy of needs or pyramid. And then we move up. We have a concern for security. We build on love and family. And if we're lucky, we're getting up higher here. If we're fortunate with the resources and the support, we get to a sense of personal achievement and success and recognition. And probably most of the people in this room are fortunate to have gotten that far. But Maslow said, you can go further if you think about human potential. And he talked about self-actualization, which is more fulfilling your dreams, being able to reach a certain level of satisfaction, being able to understand things around you in a way that don't really respond to your essential requirements, but reach deeper into your sensibilities and provide a certain pleasure, a certain sense of being that's above just simply a subsistence thing. But, really, some people came along and said, that's not the top. We should think about transcendence. And when I say the word transcendence, all right, big term, and probably a couple things come to mind. For some of you, it's the transcendentalists of New England, the imaginative people like Whitman and people who just saw in nature a beauty that brought about a feeling, a sense of being that exceeded what was easily explainable by common terms or by science. Or I know some of you in the room, transcendental meditation has been part of your life and something that you've pursued. And the idea, again, is to get a bit beyond what your own body asks for and use your mind in a way that allows you to access a certain sensibility, certain potential to be a better person. Well, I bet some of you are thinking, where's this guy going with all this stuff? Well, I think travel, in a way, is the perfect vehicle for, excuse me, I'm drifting away. Travel is a perfect vehicle for striving for this transcendence. And, I hope some of you are thinking right now, yeah, I felt that. When you can leave behind all these things, all these problems, your work, your bills, your car payments, suddenly you're in a position to sort of start with a clean slate. And if you have an awareness, if you have a sensibility about those things in the world that are important to you, but you can put them, maybe lock them up or cover them over with an attractive blanket and look more broadly, not just at what you see, but what you can experience and what you can do for others. So travel provides this opportunity for detachment, provides you the opportunity to trust in people around you, and I'm thinking your guide often, or the people who accompany you on a trip. Maybe it's your driver, maybe it's the wonderful people in this hotel who, you really understand don't have ill motivations toward you. They really want to make you comfortable and happy and show you the best of what their country or their property offers. These are all things that build you and help you move toward a state of transcendence. I think this opportunity of being separated from the familiar, familiar and, I might say mundane things kind of drag us down spiritually and mentally. But if you can set those things aside by putting yourself in a new place, you've opened an opportunity that's not just accessible in your own community, your own house, or your own occupation. So the critical idea is to be open to these new kinds of experiences. So I'm sure I've lost some of you. I'm sure some of you said, I don't know, this isn't the sort of thing that typically happens to me, or maybe many of you it does. So what I'd like to do is just read you a few things that I've heard from other travelers, that I've experienced myself, and I may have experienced with some of you, that perhaps give you a little more tangible idea of what I'm talking about. So here's a list, and I'll just read through it and maybe make some comments. When you make friends who are very different from yourself, and you're able to appreciate that those differences are really helping you better understand yourself and other people. When you are in a position to see what most other travelers miss, when you follow a guidebook or you just rigidly listen to TripAdvisor as to what you should go and do, you're going to define a very narrow path through your destination. Sometimes the idea is to not follow those kinds of things, to think about what there is out there that people haven't written about or talked about or suggested to do, often more rewarding. This is one of my favorite ones. When you encounter selfless kindness from people with many fewer resources than yourself, what an honest thing that is. When somebody perceives what your wealth is and what your means are, and they're kind to you, they invite you in, they give you something which is of value, much greater value to them in financial terms than to you. That always impresses me. When I was in the Peace Corps, it happened to me all the time that, all right, I came from a rich country, and people knew that, but this sense of generosity was just really overwhelming. When you discover a new food, taste, scent, or adaptive response that in your however many years you are, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, you hadn't had before. I can think of a couple things, the mangosteen. How many of you know the mangosteen? Unique flavor. All right, those of you who don't know it, got to go to Asia in mangosteen season. There's so many kinds of spices and scents, and if you've been to Japan for Japanese food and the real, they don't have it here. There's things that come out of the sea that are amazing. Some of you are laughing, you know what I'm talking about. Now, there are new experiences out there that you wouldn't have believed were there to be had. When you obtain a craft or artifact direct from the artisan, it's nice to buy things locally made, no matter where you find them. The local market, the craft store. I guess I draw a line at the bus stops, and everybody has to go out into the Chinese souvenir store. But you're buying things that are benefiting local people. And I think wherever you buy it, there's a tangible benefit that trickles down, even if you don't need it. But when you buy it directly from someone who's made it, I think when you put that on your shelf and you remember the story and you've taken a picture of yourself with the bowl or the picture, it has so much more meaning, probably both for you and for them. I think that's a kind of transcendence in a purchase that you should always be looking for. When you question how you are living your own life, when you see how other people are happily living theirs. This is kind of a favorite of mine. It's easy as a traveler to get into a sympathetic mode where you can feel sorry for people who are, not eating as well as you are, don't have the clothes, don't have the car, struggling through the traffic. But, sometimes that person is really doing okay. We sometimes are confronted with the poverty of our materialism. I think that's always a really useful thing when we realize what our essence is, and it doesn't really have to do with how stylish we are or how new our car is. Travel can frequently remind you of that, and I think that's always a useful thing. When you are the only foreigner present to witness an important ceremony or cultural event, I don't know if any of you have ever had the pleasure of being invited to a wedding in a far-off place where you're the only, white face in the crowd, and people are celebrating a really wonderful event, an event that we can appreciate ourselves, but are doing it in a completely different way. I've had that experience a couple times, and if you ever get that invitation, even if it's going to cost you $3,000 for that train ticket, or for that plane ticket to India or Mongolia, or wherever it is, think about doing it, because you will almost certainly enjoy that, and don't miss the opportunity. When you replace what you have read or been told with what you have seen or heard, kind of relates back to these big issues. A lot of you I know are real readers, and that's wonderful. I recommend reading before you go to see what things are, but there's nothing as informative and as real and as helpful and as, I guess, knowledge building as actually seeing it for yourself. When words or pictures cannot describe your experience, I guess I'd add to that as well when science can't describe your experience. I remember when I was here as a graduate student, I kind of had these senses that there were things that had happened to me in life that didn't fit science. And the notion here at the university, I'm sure still, is, well, that's because science hasn't moved along far enough to really get to what it is that you think is spiritual or metaphysical or wonderful in some other way. And, that's really not the question, though. I think when we don't have words, when we can't look at a photograph and understand something, but when we see it, we know it, we feel it, it has a real meaning. It shapes us as people. It shapes our view of things. It makes us stronger and wiser, I think. When you inhale deeply of an aesthetically satisfying experience, I guess that's the same thing. When you're traveling and you don't really have such a schedule, you don't have to be somewhere, you're not in a lockstep routine, and you see something beautiful, a flower, a market, just a setting, you need to really pause and say, hey, here's my opportunity. I wouldn't have this opportunity if I were at home. Just fill up with it. When snowy peaks finally appear after days of cloudy weather, well, everybody's been in a situation, haven't you? You go for the mountains and then it's raining, and you persist a little while, and what a reward it is when that sun finally comes out. You almost want to clap for the experience. Hang around there long enough to see the peaks. Well, all right, this is special for certain people here. There are birders. They know what this one is about. It's one thing to see a new bird, and I can proudly say that some of our birding guides here in the room today saw some new birds in the Arboretum. And it was wonderful, wasn't it? Didn't you just feel it, Paul, that chestnut-sided warbler or whatever? But, it's really special if you're a birder is you see a bird that isn't supposed to be there. And I don't know if you non-birders have anything that you can compare to this, but if you're a birder and suddenly a snowy egret appears that shouldn't be here, or it's not the sandhill crane, but a demoiselle crane that shows up in Hanley, wow, it just everything goes off. So I think that's a transcendent experience for me as a birder. When you make it to the top of a peak, you are not sure you would be able to climb. Well, we can look at this metaphorically, I guess, and understand that sometimes it's taking that risk, it's breathing hard but still going on. You feel that sense of transcendence. when your acts engender appreciation or gratitude of others. And we're getting into a different realm here. When you thought you would be sick, when you thought you were going to be sick just before a long trip, but you felt much better when the trip began, when you gained the trust of a child, when you were able to travel long past the age when you imagined you would have to stay home. This has got some relation here to people in the room. You know, you're all doing fine. So these are, you know, thoughts that are still very personal. It's about you. But I think I want to get to another realm here, which is, now that you're in this state, you know, how do you even take it a little further? And, you know, I wasn't sure where I was going to go with this part of the talk. I really wanted to get to this. There's something to be said, and I really had trouble articulating, but this weekend helped me a lot. Talking to you, particularly talking to our guides, there's some things going on in their lives that I think can be models for us. When we started Journeys, you know, we created a 501c3 nonprofit called the Earth Preservation Fund because good ideas were coming to us for projects overseas in our destinations. One example that just always stands out to me and is still ongoing was our friends in Ladakh who, as I said, they couldn't get a visa. And these are two of the most wonderful, selfless Buddhist. Wanchuk and Norbu. How many people know Wanchuk and Norbu? All right, you can feel for them then. You know, these people live way up in the mountains with next to nothing, sharing what they have. They're in the cold. They come down to Delhi. It's incredibly hot, and they're waiting for their visa. Okay, I was there already. So these are the people we're talking about, these wonderful people. We've sent them thousands of dollars that have gone so far in things like creating a community library, redoing the steps of their village monastery. We've raised funds, and I'm sure some of you in this room have contributed to creating a nunnery near a monastery so the women could live separately and away from their homes and practice Buddhism. One of the most wonderful ideas that I think we ever supported was they came to me, and they weren't sure this was that idea that was going to fly. But they said, you know, in some of our villages, people aren't celebrating their festivals anymore. Why is that? Well, because they don't have an astrologer. They don't have someone who can look at the seasons, look at the stars, you know, and things are changing anyways, and tell them when it's time to celebrate. So if we could just endow an astrologer, they could come to the village and figure out the calendar, and people could continue. Well, you know, who would have thought of that? I mean, would you walk into a village and say, what this village needs is an endowment of an astrologer? So you need that interaction. You need to have that kind of feedback. And you also need to be responsive to it. And we have, I think, among these wonderful people sitting in the room and our other guides around the world, people who are responsive to situations. I'm losing track of my presentation here because I'm getting really involved in this. You know, one of the things that I was also proud of, our staff in Burma. Burma has been a tough destination because for a long time, lots of people didn't want you to go there. They'd try to scare you. It's true, they had a terrible government. But if you ever went, you'd be treated wonderfully. And some of you, I'm sure, have been there, and you know Kishan and Vidya's operation and our guides there. And people who go with trepidation, like you heard in the story last night, come back with a sense of, wow, what was I thinking that this wasn't a good place to go? Well, things have changed now. It's a good place to go, and it's very popular. It's wonderful that things can change quickly. But they're also facing sometimes, as many parts of the world, dramatic situations. Many of you I know remember Cyclone Nargis that struck up through that area and particularly hit Burma really hard. And the sad story was the government really didn't feel it was that bad, and they didn't accept relief that was offered by the U.S. and other countries. Thousands of people died. It was really one of the worst tragedies of the century in that part of the world. Who was it that responded? It was the tour companies, including Kishan and Vidya. Their staff, their vehicles were the ones that went into the Delta, helped people, brought in medicine. They used their own money to buy a lot of the tents and food that they needed. Because that infrastructure was created by tourists. You know, the reason they had this means, they had these vehicles was because people had gone there. And I think that's, to me, one of the reasons why tourist boycotts don't make really a lot of sense, because tourism creates an alternative infrastructure and creates an alternative administration, people who are sympathetic to the needs of local people. You know, when you go on an African safari, whether you go with a high consciousness seeking transcendence or you just want to take pictures of lions, you're doing a lot of good because you're paying huge park fees. Macau, how much is it now in Kenya parks for a day to go into Masai Mara? $90 a day. So if you think safaris are expensive, well, start with the $90 for the park fees. Then the government added 20% tax. How much is the tax? 18%. And then the vehicle also has to pay. So, all right, I'm not saying, you know, this is outrageous. I'm saying this is actually reasonable. If you weren't paying for that amount of money, they wouldn't have parks. So there's a certain sense of whether you want to be charitable or not, you are, because you're supporting institutions through what seems like a high price. And, you know, all right, we're getting there, $300, $400 a day for a safari seems like a lot, but you're doing a lot of good with that money. You're paying for a lot of people, a lot of protection, a lot of administration, but there's also a certain corruption built in. So not all of that is really going directly to help poor people. When you make a direct personal contribution, when you are supporting someone, whether it's a purchase direct from an artisan or, you know, supporting a school, it's going right to the cause, especially if there's someone responsible in the middle. Well, I mentioned the cyclone relief. There's another project, and there's several projects that I want to mention that are active, ongoing right now. One of birds of a feather. Now, the word has gotten out a little bit here in Ann Arbor about birds of the feather. We got a few people know about it? Okay, birds of a feather is going on right now here in Ann Arbor. One of our guides here, Paul Tamwenya. Paul, just raise your hand so we see. Paul's an amazing guy. He comes from a little village that was really hard hit by AIDS in eastern Uganda. And Paul, extraordinary person, has had the privilege of an education and a job where he makes some money. He's giving 5% of his money and trying to get other people to contribute to building a school and support for AIDS orphans in his village. You know, now people are taking care of AIDS orphans, but there's no one to pay their school fees. There's no one who really sees them as the top priority when a family has trouble. The nature of many of these small African villages, there's no other support, but the community moves in. Well, Paul is moving in a big way, and he's got a benefit going on after this event tomorrow. Paul, what time is it? 4 o'clock, okay. And at Kathy Tyson's house, some of you know, to explain about this project and give people an opportunity to be supporting a really charitable effort. Our Kenya guide, Macau, has a similar project going in Kenya. And, you know, sometimes I think we as Americans have forgotten this style of caring for our brothers and sisters. You know, this notion of we are our brother's keepers, that's a politically dangerous thing to suggest. But in much of the world, you know, that's the way things work. And I guess my encouragement to you is, you know, think about that as a model. When you travel, when you have an opportunity, you know, you have people right here, ask your guide what it is that you can do directly. What kind of transcendent contribution can you make to support the community you're visiting? Thank you.